This is part 2 of a few part video on different property strategies. In this particular video, I'm going to cover 3 strategies for you. Number 1, HMOs. Number 2, serviced accommodation. Number 3, BRRR. All 3 are great strategies. HMOs aren't my favorite. The other 2 are my favorite. Watch the video to find out exactly why. This is the second video talking about different property strategies. So the first video I covered buy-to-lets alongside commercial property. In this video I'm going to share with you a few more strategies, and then there'll be some more forthcoming videos. In total you'll have 16 strategies altogether. So strategy number 2, which is again quite common and popular, is HMOs. And HMO stands for a house in multiple occupation. But before I go any further, I just want to put it out there to you that I don't have any HMOs, and I'm personally not a huge fan of HMOs, simply because being a local city councillor, I know there's a lot of HMOs in Peterborough and in the area that I work as a councillor, and the most number of complaints we get is about HMOs. And the point I'm trying to make here is, it's not that HMOs are bad, it's just they come with a lot of baggage, in my opinion. And some people out there, by the way, may disagree. That's absolutely fine, but they do require a lot of work and a lot of headache from what I hear and see. So I don't actually partake or participate in HMOs. But this isn't about my personal opinion. This is about sharing strategies with you. So I'm going to share with you what I know about HMOs and how they work, so you can make up your own mind. So HMOs, as the title suggests, is where you've got more than one person and one family living in a property, and you have a common and communal area where you have, or you may have, some shared facilities. So you could buy a house, and let's say it's a 3-bedroom house, and then turn that into 3 separate units and rent that out to 3 separate individuals. Or you can create further units depending on the size of the house, and have, say, 4, 5, 6, 7 or more people living in a single property, and of course you charge them rent per room, so therefore the cash flow can be higher. But just so you know, there's more regulation involved, and also they're not easy to manage. So either you're more hands-on, or you have an agent who specializes in looking after HMOs. But from a cash flow strategy, they are very, very popular. And they work extremely well. So let's now look into some of the things you ought to be aware of. So the first thing is, make sure you do your research, because HMOs don't work in every single area. On top of that, you've got issues with selective licensing from a local authority. You may have Article 4 restrictions in terms of planning. So make sure you've done the research and you go into it with your eyes open. I would also strongly suggest that you speak to the HMO officer at the local council, just to get their input, share with them what you're doing and get them on side. This is extremely important, because you should look to work very closely with your local authority. But I would say that as a city councillor, but it is extremely important. There are regulations in terms of health and safety, fire regulations and other things that you need to meet. So make sure you're fully aware of them. Ignorance is not bliss, and it isn't an excuse. Make sure you've got the cash flow available and you fully understand how much it will cost you to refurbish the property, because there is money involved in setting up an HMO, and do not underestimate those costs, because they can be significant depending on the size of the property. If you're buying the property yourself, look at the best ways you can add value to it and maximize your income without annoying your neighbours and the people around a particular area. Because the larger the HMO, the more traffic that brings in, the more people that are there, the more kind of changes you've got. So people are coming in, staying in for 2-3 months, sometimes moving out. So there's different faces, and sometimes the neighbours and other locals might get a little bit apprehensive about that. And I'm a big believer and fan of keeping your neighbours happy the best that you can. That's just something personal for me. You may agree or disagree with that. That's your own choice. And then make sure that you vet and find the right type of tenants who are going to look after your property and look after the area around your property. But be fully aware that there are costs involved with an HMO, and it does come with certain restrictions, and it's going to take more time, and you may have some issues with the neighbours or the local authority. I'm not saying that happens every single time. What I'm saying is, as long as you can manage that situation and the different scenarios and the different people, you'll be absolutely fine. But go into it with your eyes open. So now let's have a look at some of the kind of pros and cons of HMOs. So the first and the biggest one, of course, is higher returns and yields, because where you can, let's say, rent a house for, let's call it £800 a month. I know it's different for different areas, but call it £800 a month. If you've got an HMO and you've got, let's say, 5 rooms there, you could charge £75 per room, and let's just say there's 4 weeks in a month. I know there aren't, but let's just say keep it easy. So you'd get £300 per room per month times 5 rooms gives you £1,500. That's a lot better than the £800 that you would get by letting it out as a single let. And that pretty much is the big and main attraction for people for why they want to go into HMO. So the returns are really good, but you just need to be aware of the overall situation. The other benefit, of course, is that you've got more than one tenant. So therefore, what you're doing is you're basically spreading your risk, because if one tenant leaves, you've got 1 room empty. Using this example here, you've still got 4 rooms on rent, and it's easier to find a tenant to rent a room, usually, in the current situation, than it is to find a tenant to rent the entire house. So you reduce risk, but you still keep some income and cash flow coming in. So that works well from a void period and from a cash flow perspective. So those are the kind of 2 things that work well. Now, some of the downsides, like I've said to you, the first one is time intensive. It requires time, much more time than a single let or a commercial property. So make sure you've got the time available. I think they are more headache. I know some people on here might disagree and might post comments and say, you're wrong, Shaz. Absolutely fine. I can't be right all the time, but they are more headache, both from a community perspective and from a management perspective. Then there's more regulation involved, again depending on selective licensing, and also Article 4 and issues with neighbours and the council. You need to bear all of those in mind alongside regulation. And then you need to bear in mind that funding options are slightly restricted compared to a single let. So it's harder to obtain a mortgage for an HMO than it is for a single let, but it's not impossible because there's loads of people doing it, but just bear that in mind. All in all, I think if you're looking from a purely cash perspective, taking out my personal view of HMOs, from a cash flow perspective, it works incredibly well. You could have 5 HMOs and you could be making more money than if you had, say, 15 or 20 single lets. And that's why HMOs are popular. There's a demand there. People can't afford to buy their own homes. They can't afford to rent a whole house. Therefore, they need just a single room. So that gives them this opportunity. But I think if it's managed well, done properly, and you have a conscious investor, which I'm sure you are, who's focused on keeping their properties in good order, HMOs do work. I'm still not going to do any HMOs, by the way, but that's just a personal opinion, and I will share with you some of the other videos in this chain for the strategies that I deploy, and I'll share with you exactly why I use them, and hopefully you'll see those are much better than doing HMOs. That's just my personal view. So the next strategy, and one that I'm a big fan of and I like it, is serviced accommodation. I'll just put SA there for serviced accommodation. Now, some people think this is furnished holiday lets, and it can be and it can't be. It depends on the different type of services that you are making available. But for our purposes, we're just going to call it serviced accommodation and keep it really simple. So here, you could buy a property, convert it into serviced accommodation. I'm not going to go into planning today, and I'm not going to go into the mortgage requirements. That's something that you can look at, or I'll make a separate video for you on those 2 items. But let's just keep it very simple. You buy a house or a property, could be a commercial property, convert it into serviced accommodation, and in a nutshell, I'm not saying this is what it is, but in a nutshell, let's just call it, it's going to be similar to a bed and breakfast, where somebody comes, books a room for a night or a number of nights, They stay there and they pay you for staying there like you would do in a bed and breakfast. Two different business models, but I'm just simplifying it for the purposes of this particular video. What the other benefit you have is sometimes people are traveling into a particular area, let's say builders and contractors, so they may want to stay 2 or 3 nights, which opens up the opportunity for you to obviously have more regular guests. Moving on from that, you may have people who have contracts where they're working in a particular place for a whole month. So if you're running a proper service accommodation business, you can do a deal with them, so you can rent out one room to one person for say 28 days or 30 days, and that works well as well. So from a purely cash flow perspective, it's really good. From a tax perspective, it's really good. From a business perspective, it's really good. You've got two options. You can be the owner and the operator, or you can be the owner of the real estate, the property, and then give it to somebody to manage for you as a managing agent, or you can do what they call rent to SA, whereas you give the property to somebody else who runs it as a serviced accommodation business. But this is extremely popular, more competitive than usually staying in price-wise, staying in a hotel, and it works really well. You've then got online websites where you can book the rooms and do your marketing. But overall, this is more hands-on if you're the owner and operator than if you had a single let or an HMO. I think more work is required when you're running service accommodation, because when a guest vacates, you then got to clean the room. You got to make sure all the other services are available if you're providing those services. But as a business model, it works extremely well, and I like service accommodation a lot. So let's look at some of the benefits. Number one, great cash flow. Obviously, depending on the area that you choose, so if you're in a good area, let's say by the seaside, for example, or near the town centre where there's a lot of footfall and movement, you can have really good cash flow, and it works extremely well. There's good tax benefits in the sense that you can claim capital allowances, and if you're running a proper service accommodation business, Section 24 finance costs and the restrictions don't apply to you, and you can make pension contributions from your profits. So there are quite a few tax benefits to having a service accommodation business, and that works extremely well. Number three, it's a business that you can scale and sell. So if you create a good service accommodation business, you're not just selling the real estate, you're actually selling the business as well. And I think that is a good advantage that you don't get in all types of property strategies. So those are three key benefits. There are others, by the way, and I could spend 25 minutes talking about service accommodation because it's a good strategy and I know quite a bit about it, but I'm just going to keep it high level for you now. Some of the downsides are that they require work and time, depending on whether you're going to be involved or whether somebody else is going to be involved. So you need to manage that. As with any kind of hotel or bed and breakfast, there's more repairs and maintenance. I'll just put R&M. So you need to be aware of that and make sure you account for that. You've got VAT implications if you go over the VAT threshold. So that's something that you need to bear in mind, and a lot of people sometimes get mixed up with that or don't fully account for that. So make sure you are aware of your VAT obligations. Financing and funding is not as easy as for a single let. So again, be aware of that, and the terms and conditions and the costs are different. So make sure you're fully aware of those. But these benefits far outweigh this one here. So if I was to choose my top 3 property strategies, service accommodation would be one of them. The next strategy, which is number 4 here, is BRRR. Okay, and then you can have as many R's as you like, by the way, here, but quite simply, it's buy, refurbish, refinance, and rent. Again, one of my favorite strategies, simply because I use it a lot. So you buy a property, usually below market value if you can, and for that you obviously need to have a motivated seller, and you need to maybe go direct to vendor, but again, that's a conversation for a different way, for a different day, sorry. What you then do is refurbish the property and add value to it. So that's where the refurb comes in, refurb, add value. Once you've done that, you then go to a lender to refinance, and because you've added value and hopefully enough value, once you refinance at, let's say at 75%, you can then extract all of your funds or the funds of your investors or your JV partners, keep the property so you can get rent from it and create cash flow and capital growth. And because you've extracted all your funds, generally speaking, you should be in a situation where the property isn't costing you anything from a capital point of view. That's not always possible because you might not add enough value to it, and that means buying correctly and buying well and making sure that you refurbish and keep the costs tight, which means you need to make sure you're fully aware of how much it's going to cost you to actually refurbish the property, and you might need an expert to help you with that. But generally speaking, BRR works incredibly well. It's a fantastic opportunity, and this isn't, by the way, just for buying a house and refurbishing that and doing BRR. You can do this on a bigger scale where you're buying a commercial property, doing a commercial conversion, and then go down the BRR route, which is exactly what I do. And when we get to commercial conversions, I will share that with you. So the benefits here are exactly the same as a single let in terms of cash flow, low risk once you refurbish the property. But another big benefit, of course, is you get all of your own money back. So your money isn't tied in, and then you can recycle those funds for your next project. Some of the downsides are it might end up costing you more than you thought it would do, so costs could escalate, and that means you may end up struggling to get all of your funds back, which takes me to the next point, which means some of your capital may remain in the project where you anticipated it wasn't going to remain in the project, and that's okay unless you've got an external funder who you promised would get all of their money back once the deal is done. If that happens, then obviously you're going to struggle with capital here. You've got the added headache of both compliance and regulation for carrying out work, but alongside that, you've got the complication of working with builders, and most builders are good, just like experts and specialists in different industries, but if you get the wrong builder, it can be a lot of headache, and you might not be ready for that. So just remember, you're going to need to manage an additional relationship with a lender here, a builder here. On top of that, if you are using borrowing, usually it's bridging finance, which is going to be costly, and if you get the numbers wrong, or if you can't get all your capital out, you may end up paying higher costs for your bridging finance because you might need to extend those terms if the bridging company wants to extend them. So you need to bear that in mind. But if you can find somebody who can basically help you fund the entire project without you using bridging, then you're in a much better situation. But overall, I think BRRR is a fantastic strategy, works incredibly well. And if you're not sure which strategy to use, I would say start with BRRR if you've got the time and the appetite, because it works incredibly well.